Welcome to part 2 of the virtual tour of the art installation featuring the Power of Hope refugee art reflections created by mothers and children seeking asylum. I'm Reverend Dr. Helen Boursier. I will be helping you with this virtual tour for this traveling art installation which has been commissioned by the Interfaith Welcome Coalition of San Antonio. The art part took the written reflection to a deeper level. They began, all of these began with a reflection on a particular theme, as I explained in part 1, and then the art part helped them to go to just a deeper level. The art reflections helped the women to identify their experiences analytically while simultaneously working at the gut level from the essence of their innermost selves. The art materials were donated by numerous individuals, churches, and denominations from throughout South Texas, the Presbyterian Church USA, the Lutheran Church ELCA, Catholic Church, United Church of Christ, Seventh-day Adventist, and the United Methodist Church. Some of the art supplies that were available to the women and children, I used an open format, which meant that they could, all of the supplies were in full visible sight. They were labeled, they could come and go and help themselves and use literally any of these materials at any time during their art reflections. So they had watercolors, acrylics, tempera paint, colored pencils, gel pens, markers, oil pastels, crayons, raffia and ribbon, beads, blings, stickers, and specialty charms, punch tools in different shapes, pretty papers for collage, foam stamps, wood stamps, block printing stamps, glitter glue, puffy paint, washi tape, and a plethora of stencils and custom word stamps that I had carved in Spanish to help them label and name and express their feelings. And then we even did a very messy production called Jelly Art Mono Printing. So lots of diversity in what the women had and children had access to. And this diversity, it added to the creative energy in the room and to the participants' delight in the completed art piece. They were so proud of what they completed. It was a creative learning experience in layered mixed media. Sometimes the finished product was done on 8.5 by 11 white cardstock, and other times the same paper was cut into 8 artist trading cards known as ATCs, which are the same size as a baseball trading card, which the families exchanged them amongst themselves. We called them friendship trading cards, or with Pastora Elena as the prayer cards, with the digital examples shown on the various pieces here are copies of what the women traded with me on the little size. That was something that was a great excitement gathered with the women and children as we made the artist trading cards. And so let's take a look at this second series of the art installation. You'll see here on the top that both of these were created during a summer vacation Bible school. It was the theme was submerged in faith, and both of these were created by a teenage girl, the top one age 16 and the bottom one age 14. Then on the other side, you'll notice that there's a little girl painting with stencils, and then 2 little girls down here on this little sofa. During the sessions with the mothers, the children who were school age were in school weekdays, just like our children are children of freedom. But these children of incarceration, the school system came to them, and then the little ones stayed with their mothers. And so whenever we did art with the mothers, there were often lots of little ones sitting on laps, coloring and painting and having a delightful time as their mothers went through the art reflection process. So let's look at the second panel now. And as I had mentioned, the mothers liked to make these artist trading cards, and then they had the option if they wanted to trade one of mine. I brought in a piece of foam board that had my own samples on it, and they looked at those for ideas on what they wanted to do and make of their own. But then they also were invited, if they wanted to, they could trade one of theirs for one of mine. And here, this top image, a mother has traded hers, and she has chosen these 2. She didn't want to just trade one, she wanted 2, and it just happens to be that the ones she has were not made by me, they're made by an artist friend of mine named Lynn, and we sat one evening and made lots of artist trading cards, so I have them available as the women traded them, and they loved all the glitter that Lynn put on the batch that she did. So this mother chose 2 from Lynn. And then the little girl down here is just having a big time with something as simple as a paintbrush and watercolors. Something that's interesting to note is Our children in this country, they have been using watercolors since preschool, and it's just a normative, basic, you can get them inexpensively anywhere. But for the women and children that we worked with, they had no access. Something as simple as watercolors, they had no idea. And it was important that we had to slow down in the middle of doing this art with so many people at one time and simply take the time to show them that you need to get the brush wet and then put it on the color and then put it on the paper. And something that just seems so basic and so obvious, but as Sister Denise once said, it's not even about having money to buy the supplies. She said, who has time when these mothers have just been struggling to earn a living to pay for the basic necessities of life? And then this other side, these are copies of the artist trading cards that the women and or children traded with me. And so these are slightly larger than the actual size that they would have traded. But the one on the top left would be from Sandra from Honduras, and she made that on April 11th in 2016. The middle one is Maria, made it from Guatemala, and Esperanza, one of their favorite words to express hope. This one is made by Yemi from El Salvador. A 12-year-old made the one here. She's from Guatemala. Her name is Tammy. Jennifer from Ecuador made this also April 13th in 2016. Erica from Guatemala made this one in April 27th of 2016. Then a teenage girl made this one, age 14. She's from Honduras. Whoops, right here, sorry. This is from a teen girl, age 14, from Honduras. And this middle one here is from Senya from Honduras. And then a little 3-year-old sitting on her mother's lap, Ashley, age 3, made that one from Honduras. So now you'll see here also some poetic reflections. This would be the bottom layer, the words that the mothers wrote in Spanish, and then I translated them, and they are their actual words. And let me share with you some of these poetic reflections, their prayers and protests. My greatest love, I have much to fear. I cannot return to my country. I fear for my greatest love, my daughter. She and I have suffered much. The gangs want to violate and kill my daughter. I ask God to help us, to grant us asylum. I do not want to be abused, mistreated, killed, even less. I do not want my daughter to be abused, mistreated, killed. My daughter, my greatest love. Miriam wrote that on February 24th, 2016. Another one. My duty as a mother. I am a mother. My duty is to protect my daughter. I am a Catholic. I have faith in God. I have faith in this country, the United States. I trust this place, the United States. There are laws here to protect everyone. Here we have hope for a future. I want my daughter to have a dignified life. In the United States, there is protection for the good heart. Here, the leaders fight for the people. Marcia wrote that on July 23rd, 2015. A Mother's Day prayer, a dream for 3 daughters. This was written by an immigrant, a mother seeking asylum while incarcerated in family detention, and I emailed this to the Texas State Legislature on Mother's Day weekend of 2017. The mother actually wrote this on November 2nd, 2015. My hopes and dreams are for my 3 daughters. I want them to be safe. I want them to be happy. I want them to be with persons who care for them, who respect them, who love them, always. I want my daughters to be able to study. I do not want much for me. I prefer that mine be for my daughters. I only ask for my daughters to have freedom, to play, to study, to leave this place of family detention. I do not want my daughters to be locked up. I want them to be free, to come and go, to know many places, to be free. I want my daughters to be happy. Another story shared by a single mother protecting her son. I am a single mother. My husband beat me. I left him. Already he has made his life with another person. We have no support. The gangs know this. They threatened us. The gangs are called the Twins and Shala. We made the decision to seek shelter in the United States. A friend of mine lives here. She will receive us to save my son, to save me. We left our country in emergency. We cannot return. We have much fear. Maria wrote this on February 24th, 2016, in her reflection on From Fear to Freedom. Now let's take a look at the third panel of this second series of the art installation. You can see here on the left, the top left was made by a little boy, and it was writing about his experience of his journey. I find it very interesting that he included the row of trucks. So clearly part of his story is that he did ride in a truck. And then the bottom one is prayers of a mother who has two little boys, and they love to use the people stamps, I called them, the people stamps, and the people stencils, because they could then symbolically include themselves in their image. And so you'll see again over here on the other side the images of the artist trading cards that were made, and the bright color and the images just dance out at you. One of the things that I found very interesting is that it was an option if the women wanted, and the children wanted, to trade one of their artist trading cards for one of mine. It was completely optional. And many of them were so delighted with their own set of 8 that no, they didn't want to trade. They're taking all of them home, thank you very much. And that was awesome, that was perfect. But others were so excited that they could trade for one of mine that they would carefully study the board, and the option was to choose whatever their favorite one was. And then they would ask me which one of theirs did they want to trade. And I never wanted to pick one of theirs because I didn't want to pick their favorite one. So I would just say, you choose what you want me to have. And inevitably, time after time, they would give me what they felt like was their best. That was all they had to give, was this simple little 2.5 by 3.5 inch trading card. And they would sign their first name on the back and their country, and then write the date. And then I would sign Pastora Elena and USA and the date, and we would exchange them, and we would say, this is my prayer for you and your prayer for me. And then amongst themselves, they were called tarjetas del amistad, friendship trading cards. And I encouraged the women when they departed on to their family awaiting to receive them in the United States that they could turn it over on the back and write their contact information with the new friends that they had made on their journey and while incarcerated, so that as one mother was going off with her children to family awaiting her in New York and others to family awaiting them in Houston or in Los Angeles, that they could continue to be friends through the internet. So these artist trading cards became a very powerful communication tool of affirmation amongst the families. And the administration at the detention facility, as well as the staff chaplains there, were also just very pleased with the concept and how it fostered a friendship amongst the women and helped them to have a way to continue. And again, fostering on that forward hope. When you go on to be with your family in the United States, you can trade with your friends here. So it was never the assumption or expectation of deportation, but always when you move forwards, when you are in that safe place, you can continue to be friends with the new friends that you've made here. Welcome to part 3 of the virtual tour of the art installation featuring the power of hope, refugee art reflections, which are created by mothers and children seeking asylum. On several of the pieces on this installation, you will see these words, and these represent the bottom layer. So you'll notice there's words over here. these aren't necessarily exactly those words, but from another art reflection, I've translated exactly the words of the mothers and then put it into a poetic format so that we can hear their stories. One of the points of working with the mothers and children, I always ask permission in advance. Could I share their words? Did they want people outside of the detention facility to know their experience? And they were very, very generous, not only desiring help for their own immediate families incarcerated and seeking asylum, but they also need the United States and our nation to help with the violence and the suffering of the family that they left behind in their homelands. Each one of these mothers desperately loved their family at home, had no desire to flee their country, but made the choice because they felt they had no other alternative, either flee or die. And so it's important to understand the context that these mothers and children generously are sharing their stories and their words and their art images because they want you to know their story. So a poetic reflection here, beginning on this third section of your tour. Our trip took almost 4 months. It took almost 4 months to travel from Honduras to here. We lived in Mexico for 3 months. My mother worked in a soup kitchen to make money to cross the frontier, the borderlands. Then we left for the frontier, the borderlands. Others joined us. We traveled in buses. Then we walked. The journey through the mountains was the most difficult. They did not always feed us. It rained every day. It was horrible. Then, thanks to God, we are here. We only ask that we leave family detention soon with my mother for New York. Family expects us. A teenage girl wrote this on March 15th, 2016 on the art reflection, My Journey from There to Here. And the second one, we left everything behind, undertaking a very difficult trip, pain, risk, knowing what would happen, and yet still making the dangerous trip. Thanks to God, we received much help and support. Now, my children have hope. Now, my children have strength. We hope in God for a productive and blessed future. We ask everything in Christ who strengthens me. Philippians 4:13. A mother wrote this reflection on March 9th, 2016. And so let's begin our visual tour of this third section of the art installation. On the left-hand side, you'll see the artist's trading cards that have been made by the women and children. The top left was made by a teenage boy, age 15, from Guatemala. He had just arrived and his mother was being in the in-process orientation at the detention center, and he was not in-processed yet, so could not go and participate with the school and the other children his age, and so he was stuck with the women and Pastora Elena, and so he made this art and traded it for one of mine. This is interesting. I chose the images to include in this series completely and totally just looking at the front of the cards of what the women had traded with me. And I didn't look at names or the back in any way, shape, or form. It was only when I went to write their names on the art installation that I realized there's two images here that were actually created by a staff member who also wanted to trade one of theirs for Pastora Elena's. And this one was made by Crystal, who is a staff member there on June 22nd, 2016. And I couldn't help but think how appropriate it is that her image is mixed in with the rest of the immigrant women and children, because the staff there who worked directly with us, they were incredibly kind, incredibly helpful, and without all of their generosity and spirit, this ministry could never have gone the 2 years, because they put everything out, cleaned everything away, helped with translation, helped with the women and the children, and they were just phenomenal in every way, the staff that we worked with, and they would be called the recreation specialists, would be their technical name. And then this image here, it was made by Rosa Elizabeth. She's from El Salvador, and that was made on June 22nd, 2016. Down here, this one is from Claudia from El Salvador. Alejandra, a 9-year-old little girl, made this one and traded it. And then Josefa from Guatemala made that one. On the other side, you'll see this is actually an enlarged artist trading card that a mother traded with me. And this means so much to me, for she represents her story, what has happened so often during our time of pastoral care and a ministry of presence. The woman's name is Carmelita, and she was seeking asylum from Brazil, and she traded this card with me on April 27th, 2016. And she had been doing the art for a little while, and then she started weeping. And whenever a woman was weeping, the staff would come and get me. Well, this woman spoke Portuguese. I speak some Spanish and obviously English, and then the staff there, many of them were fully fluent in Spanish. So we had a woman with Portuguese, me with my perfect English and más o menos Spanish, and then the Spanish speaker, and we couldn't fully understand. And it seemed like this woman had received her formal notification that she was being deported, and she was just distraught. And after getting little snippets of words and around, what we came to realize was that she was going to her first credible fear hearing inside the detention facility. They have to go to 3 of these where it's determined whether or not they do have a case for credible fear, and then can be released into the custody of a family member or a close friend. And so she was going to her very first of these 3, and she was just petrified. And it was an incredible experience to hold hands with her, to pray with her. I prayed in English and a little Spanish. The recreation specialist staff prayed fluently in Spanish, and this mother spoke in Portuguese. And it was truly holy ground, an experience of blessedness that I treasure, that I had the privilege of praying. It felt like praying in tongues, for we knew that God was present in our circle of hands. And the image down here, the reflection theme is Quien Soy, which was July 23rd, 2015. It was interesting because I was there, the visiting chaplain who came with me is a pastor friend from seminary, Pastor Karen, and we arrived, and the detention facility had been completely emptied out. The day before, apparently there was not a single person there, and a few were just arriving late afternoon and in the morning, and we had a small group of maybe 25 women and children. And we did art in the morning, and then we did the jewelry in the afternoon, and it was their very first day in this incarceration facility. And they turned and they said, "Is it like this every day? This is really fun." And the staff there said, "No, it's only like this when Pastora Elena is here. She is the one that brings the fun." And so great memories, but also an affirmation of the importance of being there, being present, and then encouragement for the mothers and children. And so now let's take a look at the second panel here in this third section. The jewelry ministry is what the women loved. And so this top image here, they're holding out the works that they created. We did braided bead bracelets, and an idea that I got off of Pinterest. It's fairly simple to do, but very pretty, and all of the charms here. And the color is blue, and if you look closely, you can see that the charms that are on their bracelets are related to the sea. The Vacation Bible School Summer VBS came to the detention facility the last 2 weeks in July of 2015. And so I had kitted up all of the bracelet kits, and they have all blues for being underwater, and then all of the different themes of the sea animals. And the theme that they did was submerged in faith. And so that's what they're doing here, with their submerged in faith and the symbols there. And then always, always solidarity with prayer. Solidarity of Pastor Helen, Pastor Sabrina, and Sister Denise joined in prayer with the mothers, and them knowing how much we care, our being present with them. On this side, on the top left, a mother made this one, and the reflection theme is both and. It was August 10th, 2016. Same here, same reflection series, and you see how very different they are. And yet they started with the same general instructions, the same guided prompts, the same plethora of materials that they could use, and yet they have the spontaneity and interest in their own to do whatever they want to do. So the guided prompts that we gave and the instructions were a place to begin, and the women were free to go and do with it as they wanted. Then the one here, the woman wrote her story on my case for asylum, and here a mother wrote about her courage. Now, my case for asylum, it was simply a way that the women could practice and tell that story in all of the horrible details, because one of the aspects of being granted credible fear, they had to prove that they have personal credible fear on risk to life, that if they returned, that they, the mother and or their children would be killed, direct death threat. And so they had to tell things that were just really horrible, and they had to do it to a uniformed guard. I mean, how intimidating is that? Stuff they didn't even want to share with their best friend, they have to share in all of the explicit detail, in order, chronologically, not make anything up, not elaborate, but also not skip some of the really important things. So these mothers had a horrible time having to say the words. So the art became a safe place. That's what art therapy is about. It's a safe place that they could write this out and name their pain, name their suffering. And so inevitably there would be some women who would just be weeping at the blank page. I can't write it, I can't write it. And so the staff would say, Pastora, I have another one here for you. And I would go over and just hold them and cry with them and pray with them. And I would say, you need to write these words so that you can practice, so that you can have the courage that you need to say the difficult things, so that you can make your case for asylum, so that you can be safe in this country. Do what you can. And inevitably the mothers would write, some would write just a few words and move on, and others would write teeny little type, fill the page with their story, and then move on to the art part. And I would go back after and I would say, do you feel better? And always they would look up at me, their face would just light with a smile, and they would simply say, yes. And so that preparation to give them the courage that they need to say the difficult words of the true stories and the true horrors in their lives, empowering these mothers for the possibility of our nation to grant them safety and asylum. And now let's take a look at the third panel here. The third panel has another series of the artist trading cards. This first one at the top is Maria from El Salvador, made this on April 27th, 2016. Juana from Honduras made this one in October 2016. Marissa from El Salvador, July 20th, 2016. Dora from Honduras. Confio means I trust, and this would be one of the hand-carved word stamps. We called them word stamps. I carved these out of essentially erasers, artist erasers, so that the women had a way to label and to express. You can't go to your local Hobby Lobby and get anything in Spanish. It just doesn't happen. And same thing, this middle one, vida, life. The one here, she hand wrote paz, for peace. Then down here, Dominica and Michelle from Ecuador made this one in April 2016. Rebecca from El Salvador made this one on July 2016. And Maria from Honduras made this one from July 2016. And the prayers, these are prayer cards when they trade them with me, when they trade them with their friends. They are friendship trading cards. Over here on the right side, both of these originated from the very first art reflection session that I did specifically with the mothers on June 6th, 2015. I came to be a pastoral care ministry of presence and help the women. A young mother of 19, 2 days prior, had broken her ID card, snapped it in half, and sawed at her wrists in an attempted suicide because she had received the news that she was to be deported with her small child, and she knew it would be death when she returned to her home country. And so in her despair, she attempted suicide. Of course, the mothers were devastated not only with her attempted suicide, but the reality of the possibility that they too would receive a deportation notice. And so the theme for this art reflection was prayers of the mothers. And what's interesting to me is that the art it evolved from the hearts and souls of the women and became a very different, from the same theme, the same prompts, the same materials, and yet very, very different expressions. This one on the bottom was created by Sonia, and she had, at the point of time here, she had been incarcerated for 6 months with her 3 children, and, oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, she had been incarcerated 12 months at this point, 12 months with her teenage boy, maybe 14, her 12-year-old daughter, and her 3-year-old son, Moeses, had been incarcerated 1/3 of his life by the time that their release was finally allowed. And this was June 5th, 2015. 7 days later, this mother and family were released into the care of a sponsor on the East Coast. And her prayer is, if you can look at symbolically what she has done, this is her husband here in the United States on the East Coast, and this is the mother, and then now this represents her with her 3 children flying to freedom to join and reunite with her husband, which ultimately did happen 10 days after she created this prayer for freedom. Welcome to the 4th and final segment of the virtual tour of the art installation featuring the power of hope, refugee art reflections created by mothers and children seeking asylum. I am Reverend Dr. Helen Boursier and facilitated the art ministry for 2 years with immigrant women and children seeking asylum, and I will continue this guided tour so that you can have a sense of this art installation through cyberspace. The images, all 4 of the images on this panel originated with the very first theme that I did with the mothers on June 5th, 2015. I came to the facility as a response, a pastoral care ministry of presence, in response to a young woman aged 19 who had snapped her ID card in half, sawed at her wrists, and attempted suicide as she had received the notice of her deportation. And I went with solidarity and care and love for the mothers to help them to remember the presence of God and to remember that people are advocating for their safety and care very much for these mothers and children. And it's interesting to me, and I hope to you, at how different these different art reflections look. And essentially, the instructions all began, as you see on this side, I called it the hand prayer. And I explained to the mothers, when we pray with our hands lifted up to God, or sometimes folded, but never down. And so I invited them to hold their hand face up to the sky, to heaven, in a symbolism of prayer to God, draw around that, and then to write their prayers, what was on their hearts that they desired for God to come into community and come into connection with them. And each one of these, that the mother expressed it very differently from option of all the different supplies that I brought there, and you can see how very different each one came. And so now let's look at the second panel on this series, and you'll see the poetic reflections kind of scattered around here. And all of these came from the same theme, Ya Mevoy, enough I go. And here the women wrote what it was, that one thing that they just said, I'm done. I am not hanging around. This is over the top. I cannot stay. And so I'll share these with you, but as I share them, I want to share something that a friend of mine asked me. I live long distance away and not together very often, and recently was. And this friend asked me, as I was telling them and just really arguing on behalf of the necessity of our nation to offer shelter for these women and children, and they're not of that mindset. And I said, if you could hear their stories and see their weeping, you would open your arms to them. And this person said to me, and you believe them? Yes. I want to tell you, I believe absolutely these stories that you will hear now. One of the words the women use quite often in their reflection, the word delinquency. And they mean it in a much deeper sense than when we hear a juvenile delinquent got into a little bit of trouble. When they say delinquency, they mean the gangs, that are out preying upon women and children with the direct intent to do serious harm. So it is a much scarier word than our little juvenile delinquents. These are people who are preying on the women and children. So delinquency in my country. I have fear of delinquency. I cannot stay in my country. I have much fear to return to my country. I ask to remain here, safe. In the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, amen. Another, problems with the gangs. I left because I had problems with the gangs. I need to protect my children. They are my reason to live. I want to give them a better life, a safe life. I only hope they help me here, the people in this country, the United States. I thank God we have arrived safe. Another writes, our only hope is the United States. We left quickly from my country, El Salvador, with my son. It is better to die fighting than to die doomed, condemned by the gangs. People in my country, they told me, the trip is dangerous, but we made the trip. God never fails. I have to tell you, God never leaves me. Patsy wrote this on August 26, 2015, The Breath of Life. I left my country, violence, fear, death. God is the breath of life. Without that, we have nothing. I ask to stay in this country, and God bless my son. Another writes, I left my country where there is insecurity, fear, with the help of my God, with hope, with faith. I said, we must go. In my heart now, I have peace, joy. Soon we will leave here, the Immigrant Family Detention Center. Soon. I will go to be with my family. God is able to do all things through Christ, who strengthens me. She cited Philippians 4:13. Another, enough, I go, sad, but with the angels who protect me, sad, leaving my roots, leaving my family, but it comforts me to give my daughter a better life. I have faith in God. They will not be able to beat me. And another, our lives were in danger. Enough. I left with my children. I trust God will protect us. And another, I love my country. I do not want to leave. I love my country, but I cannot live in it. I have much fear for my son, for myself. Our lives run with danger. We came to be close to family. We came to the USA for a better future, a better education, a safe life. So now that we've heard some of the stories that are shared on this art installation by the mothers, look at these two images. Both of these were in response to the reflection theme, My Journey from There to Here. The top one was done on July 13th, 2016, and then the bottom one was created on September 9th, 2015. And what's interesting is the symbol of the butterfly, the mariposa, was a powerful symbol for the women and consistently used throughout their artwork. In fact, this exact stencil, which is a Hobby Lobby cheapie, used here and used here, I wore out this stencil. I bought several of them and would go and get another one. The mothers loved the expression of hope and that symbol of flying to freedom of the butterfly. And then over here, this is also an art reflection. You can see the background is a little bit different, but it also is the same theme of my journey. Now the top one, they did it against a prepared stencil. A friend of mine, local friend of mine, her husband made this stencil, cut it out for me, of Central America, excluding Mexico, but mostly because the women came from the countries here and not Mexico. And I would spray paint the pages with watercolor paint, but I would spritz it on, and then that part was already prepared, so the women and children would then write the reflection if they wanted to. This top one was actually made by a 15-year-old boy, and if you would read the words, you would know that the greatest, most difficult part of the whole trip for him was saying goodbye to his special girl named Maggie. And he said that along the journey he felt nothing but sadness and aloneness, because he felt that he had said goodbye to the person that he was meant to be with for the rest of his life. And then 503 was the country code when you make a long distance call, and you would punch in 503 for the country code for El Salvador. And then the one down here, the preparation part, was same exact art reflection theme, but the art process, the techniques that were the guiding beginning part was different. And so you'll see here how the drawing, and this was done by Mother, I gave a map printed from the internet, printed 8.5 by 11, and then gave them a piece of carbon paper, and they would draw the outline of Central America and then continue on from there with their reflection and with the symbols for their life, for hope, and the new journey for them. So 4 similar art reflection styles as far as my journey, and done very differently. So again, the prompts and the guiding questions are only a place for the women and teenagers who participated to begin, and they had complete freedom to run with it on how the muse led them, if you will, for Artist Talk. So now let's look at this third and final panel in this art installation series. And the top image here was taken from, we called it VBS, when all of a sudden we were doing art with the children. This would be an impromptu art with kids, and on this particular one was done June 8th, 2016. Now, sometimes I knew the kids were out of school, and I brought 2 huge Pullman suitcases loaded with art supplies. In this case, they did not mention to me that the kids would be out of school and joining us in the gymnasium instead of the 50 to 75 mothers of doing art. I all of a sudden had 250 to 300 simultaneously doing art together. Again, the recreation specialists who were so helpful throughout this whole process, when we arrived, they're like, "Oh, Pastora, we have everything ready. The table's the way we do it when there's lots and lots of people." And I was thinking, okay, well, that's great that it's set up, but I did not bring supplies for 300 people. So every possible piece of paper, every crayon, paintbrush, everything was used as the kids and mothers sat around the small tables and even on the floor and on the bleachers. And it was a day of abundant joy, as you can see from the paint. The teenage boy here was real proud of himself that he got all covered up in paint from the whole art process. But this particular one has great meaning for me because Sister Denise had been volunteering with me for a couple of months maybe at this point, and had never yet experienced the full in the gymnasium with 250, 300 people. And so we would put all of the supplies down, skinny table down the middle of the gymnasium, and they would go and sit at small tables around. And the little girls always loved to hang on Sister Denise, and so they would be hanging on her, and she would talk one-on-one. And I looked at Sister, and I said, when you get a moment, could you please float around and make sure that they know how to use the supplies? Because what was so obvious for us that, oh, watercolors, you dip the brush in the water, you dip it in the color, and then you put it on the page. The mothers didn't get that because they had not had any even basic art experience. And the same thing with the stamps. I brought in a bazillion stamps and stamp pads, and sometimes they just didn't realize that the stamp, you open up the pad, you put the stamp on it, you make that imprint, and then you go for it. And they would draw around the outline of the stamps because they did not realize you opened up the stamp pad. Anyway, so we made it a point to just float around and make sure that the mothers and the children in this case all knew the basics of how to use and have full access to the supplies. So when I explained this, just would you float around, you take that side, I'll take this side. Sister Denise, she looked up at me and her eyes were kind of spinning in opposite directions, and she said, okay, when I get a minute. It was just like, the whole thing is just so overwhelming to suddenly do art with that many children from, probably 14 months on up to the mothers, and the average age of the mothers is 21, 22. So a room exploding with children and young adults. But the joy so abundant, the joy. And then the image down here was taken during, we call this Christmas VBS, and we did that in the morning, and then in the afternoon we did Las Posadas. And this was a few days before Christmas in 2015. So the children, I had volunteers had cut out around the, I'll just say it, the Burger King crown, and they on tag board paper, poster board paper from Hobby Lobby, and the kids used wax resist, a real basic art technique where you used crayon and then you watercolor painted over it. So they did these, and then we stapled them together, and they had a crown to wear in the afternoon for Las Posadas. And there was such delight in this simple act of a strip of paper cut into the shape of a crown so that they could be part of the Las Posadas procession in the afternoon set. So a great delight there. And then here we have another series of the artist trading cards. And the top one here is made by Rubidia from El Salvador, the middle one from Irene from Guatemala, and she must have wanted to trade too, because this one's also Irene from Guatemala on the same day of April 11th, 2016. And then Mirna from El Salvador made this one, Maria from Guatemala, Maria from El Salvador, Sarah from Guatemala, and this is the second one in this whole series of the art installation that, as I explained earlier, I didn't look on the back to see who made them. I just went by the images on the front from the ones that the mothers had traded with me. And this happens to be from a recreation specialist named Karen, who wanted to trade. She said, I don't know what you're going to do with these one day, but I want to be a part of it, and I like what you have made, and I want to trade one of mine for one of yours. And the same person, there was another recreation specialist too, hadn't made any, didn't have anything to trade. And so again, the staff person said, well, you can have one of mine and I'll trade a second one so that you can have which one you want from Pastora Elena. So we just always experience great generosity from the recreation staff that worked with us. And then this one down here is from Doris from Guatemala, made on April 11th, 2016. This has been an incredible experience for me to share the artwork that the women and children created. They left an imprint on my spirit, on my life, and I will always be grateful for the privilege, for it was a great privilege to work closely over the course of the nearly 2 years. I worked one-on-one with at least 5,000 women and children seeking safe asylum in this country. And I hope that you will take from this virtual art experience the power of hope, which is dedicated to these women and children seeking asylum, and that you would share their story, share their love for God and their confidence that this nation, the United States, will say, bienvenidos, welcome. Thank you very much.